Hello there, I'm the serial plagiarist, and just like Philip Mewson, remember him, was an outcast from journalism after he was caught stealing from multiple outlets, and content creators in good old-fashioned plagiarism, the namesake of my channel, Kyle Katarn became an outcast in the Jedi ways. You might be arguing that Jedi Outcast is actually referring to the main villain, but when you think about it, it may actually be referring to both of them in a symbolic kind of way. It's like poetry. It rhymes. But still, this is the most unclear title in the series. And speaking of which, the series completely changed its title. It went from Dark Forces to Jedi Knight over the years. So despite what this game is officially labeled, its correct title is Star Wars Dark Forces 3 Jedi Knight II Jedi Outcast. But with that out of the way, this game is a classic just like all the others. It massively improved on its predecessor, just like Dark Forces 2 improved on Dark Forces. If there was ever a series that innovated and improved with every game, the Jedi Knight series would be it. I'm more lax towards Mysteries of the Sith and Jedi Academy because they're both spin-offs, but they still improved on the successful formula. As such, there isn't a single bad game in this sub-series. Jedi Outcast in particular continues this trend. Jedi Outcast was developed by a third party this time around, Raven Software, which is a studio that nowadays has been sucked into the Call of Duty money machine. Jedi Outcast ironically runs on the Quake 3 engine, which was also the basis for the Call of Duty series. So essentially they all form a symbiote circle, going back to the same engine. The engine is also known as id Tech 3, so we're 4 engines behind when it comes to this game. Still, this engine was capable of a lot back in its day. It's still the original basis for Call of Duty, even if it's been heavily modified since then for modern releases. Jedi Outcast, despite the change in developers, still has the same core identity from the previous games. It's like we didn't even transition developers, and that's impressive for a switch of developers. Usually when franchises change developers, its identity changes as well. A key reason the Hitman series, for example, maintain the same identity is because it was made by the very same development team as the first one up until Hitman 3. So this game was definitely put in meaningful hands. Also, this is the first in the series where we had a story unhindered by technology. For what it was, Dark Forces 2 had a great story by the standards of its time. A very simple story akin to the original trilogy of finding your destiny, avenging your father, and becoming a Jedi. It was impressive, and the presentation was fairly simple. Cutscenes that move the story along, which is a very traditional way of telling a video game story. Since this is the era where video game stories were fully achievable in a shooter, Jedi Outcast takes it to its full advantage. Kyle Katarn in particular remains the same classic Star Wars video game hero we all know. Jason Court's likeness was used for the character since Dark Forces 2, and I gotta say, that when it comes to Jedi Outcast and Academy, Jeff Bennett was a brilliant choice. While he is more gruff sounding than Jason Court and Reno Romano, he embodies the persona that Jason Court's persona had. Besides, we needed a definitive voice actor by now. If there's any voice work that should be done for Kyle Katarn, I'd give Jeff Bennett a call, if he's still around. Okay, yeah, he's still active. I also recognize Jeff using the same voice for Ultra Magnus in Transformers Animated. Also, I want to mention how he and Reno Romano both did male Revan in KOTOR and the Old Republic MMO respectively. So without further ado, let's get into Jedi Outcast and experience one of the best lightsaber fighting simulators that not even the modern games can replicate. Starting a new game, we get what you'd expect from a real Star Wars story. A title crawl. This time, it's been 8 years since the Battle of Endor, so around 2 years after Dark Empire. The New Republic still has to clean up Imperial factions that refuse to admit defeat. Kyle Katarn, meanwhile, after defeating Jarek and the Dark Jedi, has given up the Force because the dark side is a bitch. Based on what we see in the whole series, Kyle does have a loose allegiance to the light side, and tempts himself to falling a lot. I inferred that Kyle gave up the Force because of the events of Mysteries of the Sith, but apparently there was a lot of other stuff that happened. But I haven't gotten into any specific books that explores that stuff. So for now, let's assume it's because of Mysteries of the Sith. Anyways, Kyle has returned to his mercenary ways with his partner Jan Ors, and is on a mission to a seemingly abandoned Imperial outpost on the planet Kejim. One criticism that I do have is that the pre-rendered cutscenes are really fuzzy and lesser quality than cutscenes that use in-game assets. So some better quality cutscenes would have been nice. Anyhow, to start the story, we've got Kyle and Jan in their replacement to the Moldy Crow, the Raven's Claw, and basically having a chat. The graphics at that are a bit dated, especially in regards to a lot of character models such as the first two that we see, Kyle and Jan. Jan, when you look closely, has a weird face, and Kyle, if he wasn't from Star Wars, probably looks like a redneck hermit cannibal out of context. I suppose the engine wasn't really built for graphics. After all, most of the models in Quake would have been evil monsters or guys with helmets. Anyways, both Kyle and Jan are contacted by Mon Mothma, who gives them a partially decoded transmission from Imperial forces on Kejim. Among the words spoken are the words Reborn and Valley of the Jedi. So we're starting off with a mystery plot, are we?
Well, what are stories but mystery boxes?
This turns what would be a pretty stale job into something more sinister. Kyle and Jan were the only survivors from the Valley of the Jedi, and are the only people who know where it is. Oh, sorry, Ouija knows where it is too, but we don't see that stubby little droid for the rest of the series. So where the fuck he is up to the players to decide. Man, would that make the perfect Disney Plus series? But again, Disney always foils the good ideas. Instead, we get sad excuses for series, like Andor and Kenobi among others. Anyways, turns out this mission is more than meets the eye. This is a small nitpick, but when the cutscene ends, we cut straight to the level in an awkward transition. It's actually one of the few times in the game this happens. First we were in space, and boom, now we're at the outpost. We've got Jan as our only ally. When the level starts, you have the relative element of surprise. But look here, I tried to line up a shot with my Briar Blaster pistol, and the stormtrooper dodges it. Damn, this random trooper has fast reflexes. He should be on the dodgeball team. You know, something I like doing is coming up with random backstories for enemies you come across in the game, since we're free to come up with our own headcanon. So this trooper that dodged a shot is called Dodgy. He's from the planet Dodge 2 and was an expert holo dodgeball player at school, revered for his fast-ass reflexes. He later joined the Empire and became a stormtrooper to provide for his wife and children, to which he was stationed on Kejim in the later years of the Galactic Civil War. Based on the conversation we can overhear, he was planning on retiring a few days later, but of course, Kyle Katarn was there to ruin everything and ambushed him before blasting him off a ledge, and his body was never recovered. He was essentially KIA. Also, the dude he was talking with was his best friend Generico, who was killed afterwards. Then we killed his commanding officer and the rest of his unit. So yeah, anyways, we storm across the front entrance and killing stormtroopers. Jedi Outcast is a less generous game than the previous games, as it doesn't allow for auto-aim. And the aiming is a little floaty and inaccurate, but it ain't no Fallout 3 or New Vegas. Seriously, those two games had the worst shooting I've ever seen. To be fair though, in the early game, it doesn't make things frustrating. The floaty gunplay, despite setting back the gunplay, didn't make it unenjoyable. In fact, gunning down stormtroopers is still quite satisfying. I think this can mostly be attributed to the sound effects and death animations. Seriously, Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy may have some of my favorite animations out of all the Star Wars games I played. It's also a good thing that it's not a straight up ragdoll. In the early game, it's just you with a gun, and for a melee option, you've got the stun baton, which does less than ideal damage. The stun baton is usually there as a last resort, and is not an effective weapon in the slightest. Trust me, the lightsaber is far better. But just like Dark Forces 2, you gotta work for the damn thing. Also, you have to be pretty careful about how you navigate, because you typically will not survive a jump from too great a height. And believe me, this game is pretty tricky with the heights. Even when you're on the first damn level, there's multiple times where you could fall from too great a height, and straight to your death. Basically, we activate a turret to get the door open. Pretty simple. Immediately after that, we go down an elevator where we're locked out of the rest of the base. Some players get confused right about here, but when it comes to me, I actually found it easy. I immediately thought of the outside-the-box solution that was going underneath the elevator and shooting this electrical tank thing, getting out of the way when it bursts into flames towards you, and use it to sneak into one of the computer rooms or whatever it's supposed to be in the outpost. I open the door, and Jan stays around this area to scan the terminal and see what we can uncover. Around the base, navigation is pretty experimental and requires thinking outside the box. The main objective from here is to put in a 3-part code to access the next main area of the base. As such, they'll have their own ways of being accessed. The blue code is accessed by going down an elevator into a dark storage room. You'll need light binoculars to navigate effectively, which can be collected all across levels. This will take you to the code, which is surrounded by Imperials to gun down. Thankfully, when you see the code, you don't need to memorize it, as it's saved on your datapad that you could always turn to for objectives. It is kind of a shame that they also didn't include a map screen, because I occasionally got lost, so that may be another criticism. Anyways, to access the green code, you will need to wipe out all the stormtroopers, eventually coming across the terminal. Kyle contacts Jan to slice through the terminal, and so you're required to go back to her. But they give a sense of urgency by having her be pinned down. Fun fact, Jan is voiced by Vanessa Marshall, who also voiced Hera Syndulla in Rebels. You escort Jan back to the computer, and she unlocks the room with the green code in it. Lastly, to get to the red code, you need to travel through a tunnel that explodes behind you, and you gotta find your way back. As such, we are required to fight through Imperial probe droids, who make the same creepy sound effects. In video game terms, it works quite effectively, not to mention the thing flies around and almost killed me given I didn't have a lot of room to maneuver without falling to my death. I also almost died getting near the red code, as there's so many stormtroopers who mop the floor with me. You also need to turn on the computer that inputs the codes. After that, you put in the codes and get access to the next level. So overall, a solid starting level, full of variety, fast shooting, and creative set pieces. And if I have to praise this game for anything, it's the set pieces. The set pieces are perhaps the best I've seen in a Star Wars game, aside from Jedi Academy. In the next level, you gun down more stormtroopers, no duh, but you also get very creative rooms and areas throughout this level. For example, early on, you come across a room that's freezing cold. You find a switch to cool the room down, in which you'll melt all the ice cream. On top of that, you'll come across a bunch of turrets and probe enemies. Turret enemies require you to be out of line or running around to avoid their rapid fire. But aside from that, they aren't too hard. They're a hazard that stops you in your tracks, but you'll be able to get your ass moving soon after you take them out. There's also this room that reminds me of the box from the Clone Wars because of the moving platforms, which in itself was based on a movie called Cube. Also, make sure you don't shoot at a bad angle when it comes to these red shield generators, otherwise you are terminated. After that, you're supposed to go through a pipe and shoot more Imperials. This is really the level that is filled with turrets you have to dodge. Fortunately, at least on the difficulty I played on, which was Jedi, you have enough back to pickups in the early game. Except for this part where I ran out, and if someone shot me, it would have been a one-hit death. To further add insult to injury, they had a rapid fire turret, which forces you to get into cover. You also got to make sure the support troopers don't hit you either. This is probably the most unfair part in this level, but after that it was fine. I eventually turn on the switch, and the whole room goes nuts after the center starts spewing laser beams. If you touch the laser beams, it's an instant death. So you gotta reenact all the spy films you watched growing up, and damn it! Anyways, after that, we get a set piece where you control a mouse droid to make the next room safe to enter, since those darn Imperials made the room too dangerous from their experiment gone wrong. You mop up the remaining stormtroopers, and then we've completed the level. Kyle opts to grab some of the crystals from the outpost, but we get that thing in movies where we were being watched the whole time. Spying on us was Gallic Fire, who works for a mysterious Dark Jedi, Desann. He informs Desann that Katarn and his partner infiltrated their little outpost and killed everyone in there, except for Bob the Builder, who was a freelance carpenter, who hid from Carl and Jan while they were killing everyone. Only question now, the damage and loss of life, Can he fix it? Okay, I made that up. Anyways, back on Coruscant, Kyle and Jan find some clues about what the Imperial Remnant were doing. They seem to be harvesting these crystals, similar to what a Jedi has in their lightsaber. Kyle Katarn doesn't like working with the Force anymore, but Mon Mothma offers the both of them a double paycheck, and Jan takes the offer. So Kyle has to go along with it. This probably isn't everything, but I like how Kyle in this cutscene has a gut feeling that this is going to turn out to be something that would have gotten him into trouble, if not for Jan accepting the job. If you played this game, you know what I'm talking about. This is the butterfly effect at its extreme. I don't know, it's something I observed. Anyways, the crystals come from a mining colony named Artus Prime, so it's likely the Empire has taken over the planet. As always, Kyle and Jan go to the planet to do their thing. Apparently, Jan always gets the easier job of flying the Raven's Claw, while Kyle has to run a gun.
It just isn't fair.
It's a shame you never get to fly the Raven's Claw in the whole series. That would have been nice. Another advancement Jedi Outcast makes from previous games is having a stealth system. It's very primitive, but it's there. You need to get inside the outpost without being detected. It's also around here that you pick up a Wookiee bowcaster. The bowcaster is one of my least used weapons in the game. It packs a punch, sure, but there's other better weapons. Plus it's hard to hit your mark. There's this mostly useless feature that allows you to spread 5 shots, but good luck hitting anyone with those 4 extra shots. Around this level, you'll be blasting stormtroopers just like the last 2 levels. But damn, there are a lot of them. There was this one part where I saw the stormtroopers from above, so I tried throwing a thermal detonator, but it ricocheted off the wall and was forced to run away. The grenades aren't useless, however, as I used one to wipe out 2 stormtroopers and crippling 2 others who died in one hit. You'll need to do some pretty tricky jumps to get into the mines, but before that, I was overwhelmed by so many bucket heads. When we get into the mines, you gotta deal with these critters. This is around the time I opted to use my stun baton. These pests aren't that dangerous, but still. Eventually, we get to this generator, destroy it, and then we take a damn tram over to the next level. The next level has you climb the everlasting staircase, and it's here where you free the colonists. As well as this, there's even a part where you corner an Imperial officer and hold him at gunpoint. He thankfully isn't a drawn-out escort. You escort him long enough for it to not get tedious. It's around 2 minutes. Now I wanted to talk about the last level before you get your Force powers. And it also happens to be one of my favorite levels. It starts with urgency, as we need to get into a turret to protect the colonists, who are holding off Imperial forces. You blast them all, and this is actually a turret section that isn't tedious. Your turret feels all-powerful, and can even take down an ATST. Damn, this turret is well armed. After the colonists are safe, we proceed to hike across the area, avoiding being squished by an ATST. Right here, we avoid obstacles like an electric floor, destroying cannons, and other stuff that feels very high tension. Seriously, this is a highlight in the game. Even though I'm replaying this game, I was greatly anticipating the end sequence. After we've completed all of our objectives, Jan contacts us, but she's apprehended by an unknown entity. Going to her location, we get introduced to the main villain and his apprentice. Based on appearance and presentation on a first playthrough, Desann looks pretty imposing. It's also helped by his unnaturally hard-ass voice. I'm not sure how to describe it. On a first playthrough, I started sweating, because I knew this would not end well. Kyle confronts this guy, and the two exchange insults based on appearance. And with Jan captured, Kyle prepares to take on this lizard boy. It's you with a blaster versus him with a lightsaber. And the Force! Desann during this boss fight, shall we call it, will kick your ass. Shooting him is useless given he'll just deflect, and using a stun baton also won't work because he'll just push you away. I have to compliment this game for making Desann's fighting feel exactly like he's toying around with you. I know that might not feel like much, but remember that this game was released in 2002, so having AI be like that is commendable. So yeah, you lose this fight. You're loser. Desann strangles Katarn with the Force, calling him absolutely pathetic as someone without the Force. It's like Kreia said, take the greatest Jedi Knight, strip away the Force, and what remains? This quote is so true here. Desann remarks about testing out his skills on Jan. Kyle spats back that he better not touch her. That's where Desann has the most brilliant evil idea. He tells his apprentice Tavion to kill Jan. Tavion proceeds to cut down Jan off screen, and Kyle is absolutely furious as Desann throws him away like tinfoil and takes off in his ship. The now livid Kyle Katarn remarks,
"You want a worthy adversary? I'll give you a worthy adversary."
Yeah, that's right. We're gonna use the Force again and take our revenge, just like Steve in that Minecraft music video. Kyle goes straight to the Valley of the Jedi on Ruusan. He observes the valley for a brief moment until a certain someone speaks to him. His father, Morgan Katarn. Okay. I gotta criticize the game for making me confused. Where did a character like him learn to preserve his consciousness after death? Was he Force sensitive too or something? According to Wikipedia, he was. And apparently, he appeared as a ghost to Luke Skywalker too. So I'm probably gonna have to read the Jedi Knight novels. Point is though, it's not really explained to the average player. I'm just saying that maybe it would have made more sense for someone who doesn't read the books to have Q-Ron be the one who speaks to Kyle about all this. We've seen him as a Force ghost in Dark Forces 2. Also, I noticed that we're going for another revenge story. In Dark Forces 2, Jarek killed Kyle's father. Now, we've got Desann and his apprentice who killed Kyle's partner. Is this revenge story different in any way? Well, I mean, yes actually, but I'd have to spoil the rest of the game. So we'll wait until we get to certain parts of the game. Kyle's father makes him think about his decision to reconnect himself to the Force. Despite conquering his battle with the dark side when fighting Jarek, Kyle may almost fall into that trap again. Kyle ultimately decides to use the Valley of the Jedi as a shortcut to regaining his connection to the Force. There's a small detail where Kyle is taken back, because he forgot what the Force felt like, but now he's got the Force again. He's going to look for Desann, but first, he's going to need to get his lightsaber back. So his next stop is the Jedi Academy on Yavin 4. We also get a cutscene in between that reveals that Desann followed us to the valley, presumably through a tracking beacon. So Desann is ready to empower as many people as he can. But we don't have a lot of time to think about that. We go to the Jedi Academy on Yavin 4, where we can explore around a bit. There isn't any combat whatsoever. There's this room where we can see two students doing lightsaber practice, and you can watch. It's a small bit, but it makes you feel right at home essentially. But this ain't where we're supposed to go. We're supposed to go and meet the one, the only, Luke Skywalker. And unlike The Last Jedi, he acts how you'd expect. Man, someone should make a parody of Jake Skywalker in the post-Return of the Jedi expanded universe. But anyways, Kyle speaks to Luke about getting his lightsaber back. He of course explains that Jan's been killed by a Dark Jedi, and Luke knows immediately who this Dark Jedi is. Desann. Luke explains that Desann was a student at his Jedi Academy, coming from some dirt poor world. Not exactly North Korea, but it might as well be that. Surprisingly enough, Desann isn't focused on much in terms of backstory besides this one exchange. There's a lot left up to interpretation. I did somewhat wonder if we could have gotten more on Desann and built him up as a character, because as it stands, Desann is the weakest main villain so far. Rom Mok was a good antagonist, and Jarek was an excellent one. So I'm going to have to say here that Desann is not exactly a very memorable villain. He's a one-off character, with not much potential to expand in anything else. In the scale of things, it doesn't really matter, but Rom Mok and Jarek are villains I'd actually like to see more of, in stories that predate their appearances in their respective games, given they die in them. Desann, aside from appearance and voice, doesn't leave much of an impression. He's evil because he's evil. Luke explains in a small amount of detail that Desann became more and more argumentative and aggressive when he got to the temple, and he killed an unspecified student in cold blood, then fled before he could be counseled. And believe me when I say that's all we get. Given Kyle and Desann in a way are two sides of the same coin thematically, it was a missed opportunity not getting into Desann more. They're both essentially Jedi Outcasts, just in the opposite ways. But anyways, aside from this, Kyle Katarn has to go through a test. Kyle asks Luke why they can't just do things the simple way, and Luke responds,
If the ways of the Jedi were easy, there'd be millions of us instead of dozens.
That might be a passing line of dialogue, but it's pretty meaningful in terms of channeling the light side and being a Jedi. Luke still tells Kyle that he has to retrieve his lightsaber through a Force test, while he tracks Dasann's whereabouts. So we go get our lightsaber in a ruined temple adjacent to the Academy. We go over there, and this is where we get our Force powers. They're all power-ups that give us the abilities. The base Force powers include push, pull, jump, and speed. All the essentials we saw in the prequel trilogy, and powers that are mandatory for a game like this. You'll be solving puzzles, none of which are too hard, nor do they make your brain go numb. They actually just test out your Force skills. I've probably said this before, but I'll say it again. I hate crippling puzzles. The hardest time I had with Fallen Order was when there were a bunch of elaborate puzzles that I much disliked. I had to look up how to solve them. I first played Jedi Outcast, I'd say around 2012 or 2013, when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. I was born in 2003. Jedi Outcast was kind of confusing with its level design, and I had to look up what the hell I was supposed to do, even back then. That's not much of a problem now, but back then, I found things tedious in terms of level design. This level I'd say I had one big problem with, and that's retrieving your lightsaber. The rest of the level's puzzles are simple, but I didn't realize you needed to use Force Pull to grab the lightsaber before the cage closes. Back then, I was used to super straightforward levels. Maybe it was my fault for not using my problem-solving skills, but then again, I was still relying on my mum to tie my shoes, because I was that kid who found tying his shoes super hard, and it took me years to figure out how to do it on my own. Even then, I'm still not good at it, but at least I know how to do it somewhat. Anyways, our ultimate goal is the lightsaber, which will become any player's favourite weapon for the rest of the game. So with that being said, Luke Skywalker greets us when we finish the test. He tells us that our best lead on Desann was his ship, whose registry was tied to a gang lord named Relo Baruch. Kyle responds that he knows about Relo. He claims to be an honest garbage hauler, but he's the worst of the worst on Nar Shaddaa, and not even the Hutts will touch him. So yeah, we might not go straight after Desann, but we've got a lead. One of my colleagues criticized the game for making us go on a detour, but this does tie into the main story in us following Desann. It's sort of the trope where we start small and build our way up. Anyways, we also get a discussion between Kyle and Luke. Luke actually expresses surprise that Kyle passed the test with flying colors. Given the length of time he went without the Force, he expected him to fail outright, but pieces together that he's been to the Valley of the Jedi. This is where Luke has a serious discussion with Kyle. Luke tries to warn Kyle about falling to the dark side. If he doesn't let go of his anger, it will destroy him. It's the classic speech about not falling to the dark side, but it works really well. Kyle says that he doesn't know if he can keep himself under control, but does decide to give Luke the location of the Valley of the Jedi just in case. So to describe this whole sequence, it's a great way to get your lightsaber. And with that being said, we head over to Nar Shaddaa, the Smuggler's Moon. I like the sequence at the start of the level. We don't get to use any of our Force powers yet, and we walk into a bar, handing over our weapons. Except for, of course, the lightsaber. There's a surprising lot of interactivity, from briefly speaking to people at tables, to even watching a match between two critters. We even get dialogue if we try to go through an out of bounds area. This all could have been a cutscene, but I like the small touches. We trigger the important stuff, however, when we speak to one of Thrawn's cousins. Obviously not as bright as the Grand Admiral. This bartender with intentionally horrible grammar. Despite resembling Thrawn, he has such a slimy voice. It's like a drug dealer in a cartoon. Kyle treats him as such too. He requests Corellian ale, specifying that he wants it in a clean glass, and then asks questions about Relo. Throughout the exchange, he reveals he's got a lightsaber, and the bartender activates the alarm to try and kill Kyle. Moral of the story, kids:
Never trust a bartender with bad grammar.
A classic line from Kyle. When you start fighting off the gang members, you'll realize that they got a little carried away with the difficulty. Well, to be honest, it doesn't start off too bad. Having the Force is a sigh of relief for taking on the garbage hauling gangsters, but seriously, These gangsters pack quite a punch. Some of them carry bowcasters, and some throw thermal detonators. It's actually like the bar is going batshit crazy. In this part, the bowcaster guys are the biggest hassle. They seem to throw a lot, presumably because the level design is placed a lot, but they don't detonate right away. They bounce around, waiting a few seconds to explode. Basically, you gotta get up on a higher floor and deactivate the alarm Thrawn's cousin set off. You then proceed to force Thrawn's cousin to tell us where Relo is, and he gives us the indicator to follow the garbage collectors, and then it's up to you whether or not he lives. Seriously, Thrawn's cousin just crouches like a little bitch, and you decide his fate. Something that this game could have done, but strangely didn't, is give us two endings. The last main game had a light side and dark side ending. Why not here? I don't know. It just seemed weird to me. This would have been the perfect opportunity to improve on Dark Forces 2, where you can make small decisions that affect the ending. That was the original idea, wasn't it? I'm just saying that would make for sufficient extra content. However, I hear this game's release cycle was kinda short, so I can see why they went with a linear story. Anyways, it's time to go back outside, and when it comes to enemies, we've got the same as usual.
But the problem is the fucking snipers!
Seriously, this level can become a hassle to many players, as the game includes snipers that make Crosshair look like a fucking joke. They resulted to at least 60% of my deaths on this level, and I game overed a lot. Some have criticized this level for its insane difficulty spike, but I never found it frustrating enough. Why? I'm not sure actually. Maybe it was because it was effective trial and error. Despite the fact that the snipers keep shooting at you, so you gotta be always on the move. If you play this on PC in particular, you'll eventually learn that you'll need to save and load every time you die. The checkpoints in this game in general are rather scarce, so that might be another criticism. Point is, this level will kick your ass. I suppose the main problem I had with it is that your force powers are sort of mitigated. This level probably wouldn't be half bad if you were more powerful, because you only get the level 2 force jump in the next level. I know they had to gradually progress your force powers, but I suppose in the flow of the story, something had to go first. Still though, maybe they should have removed the snipers. That seemed to be the biggest problem. Like seriously, think about it. If the snipers were taken out, the level would have probably still been challenging, but you wouldn't feel crammed in for having to take cover. At least at this point you've got a sniper rifle too, so you can shoot back at them for all the shit they'll cause you. I also have to say that it's easy to fall off, given narrow platforms and the like. No railings whatsoever. Seriously, someone could easily fall off and snap their necks, or worse. Point is though, when you eventually take out all the snipers, you'll go into a garbage hauler, straight to the Kingpin's base. If you cleared enough of the snipers, you won't encounter much trouble on your way over. With that, we're on to the next level. Fortunately, now that you're indoors, you still don't have to deal with snipers the same way you did in the first level. There still are grenade dicks, but aside from that, it's much easier. Also, the developers gave you the best reward for completing the last level. Level 2 Force Jump, as mentioned before. And trust me when I say this upgrade is going to help you out a lot. With that, we make it to Relo's base of operations, and Kyle remarks how much it stinks. The problem solving in this level is quite intricate. You have to go all over and unlock stuff to be able to progress. It may take a while, but it never became too frustrating, except when I was struggling on where to go for a bit. Still though, this base is extremely expansive. The level 2 force jump was also used for more than just a reward. It's pivotal to this level. Eventually, you'll come across a big surprise guest appearance. Kyle goes into a holding cell area, and Lando Calrissian, voiced by Billy D. Williams, the original actor. Given this was made before Lando became Pando Lando due to wokeness at Disney, his appearance is much appreciated, and they nail the writing and personality of the character. Lando tells Kyle that Relo's thugs were starting shit on Cloud City, and so Lando tried to convince Relo to cut the crap and tell him who his employers were. The last thing before being thrown in this cell was hearing the name Desann. Kyle explains who Desann is and opts to find a way to free Lando. Lando tells us the password to get into Relo's command center is Ruby Bleals, which was a drink referenced earlier in the game by Thrawn's cousin. Anyways, we make our way to Relo's command center, which is jam-packed with turrets and enemies, and eventually we come across the dude himself. We see he's a Rhodian that ought to lose some weight. They probably should have called him Diabito.
Mama, may I have cookie?
No, Diabito. Roll back to kitchen.
Oh.
Anyways, Kyle and Diabito briefly talk about Desann before Diabito pulls turrets and a handful of gangsters on us. Upon slashing those gangsters dead, we barge into Diabito's place, but the fat ass disappeared. We eventually free Lando and find the pipe system Diabito went through to escape. Now we can move on to the third and last Nar Shaddaa level. In this level, we and Lando fight our way past Diabito's thugs. Given we left the Raven's Claw back at the Jedi Academy, and the gangsters probably destroyed the ship we took to get here, Lando figures our best bet is his ship, the Lady Luck, seen in the Thrawn trilogy for example. So we head over to the Lady Luck. Lando tells us he needs the ship to get some fuel, and on top of that, open the bay doors. Despite this being partially outdoors again, the snipers were never as much of a hassle than they were in the first level here. I also like the vibe this level gives off. And what I mean by that is when we get around to refueling Lando's ship and opening the bay doors, we get onto the ship only to be greeted by Diabito on a gunner turret. This game does a good job at anticipating tense moments. I felt a similar way on Artus Prime, where Jan was captured by Desann. It was very suspenseful, if that's the right word. If you play the game yourself, you'll know what I mean. Jedi Academy, in fact, doesn't quite replicate the feeling, despite just being an asset flip spin-off game. Anyways, we escape Nar Shaddaa and make it all the way to hyperspace, straight to Cloud City, as that's where Diabito's thugs stuck their thumbs up. Kyle has a nightmare about Jan's death, reminding us that he's still angered. Lando was unaware about Jan's death, as Kyle neglected to tell him, still broken over a loss. He confesses Jan's fate to Lando here, much to the apologism of Lando. With that being said, Lando drops Kyle off at the very bottom of Cloud City. It's around this time you'll get level 2 push and pull, and level 1 force healing. Despite that, the game teases you with the ultimate beginner's trap. You'll bust open a vent, and presumably wait for an elevator or something to come down, and what you're met with instead is a force that pushes you back and results in your death in the gas clouds of Bespin. Once you figure that out, you'll basically start slashing at Diabito's thugs again. There's a flaming room you need to get past, which is another beginner's trap. Eventually, you'll come across this room with falling platforms, and so you'll need to jump across to get to the next floor. Force speed and jump is pretty much a requirement here. I didn't realize for a while that this red stuff was actually walkable, so I just went around until that realization. After that, you've got this massive jumping chasm, resembling the area where Vader told Luke the massive reveal. Jumping up is actually pretty fun. Then we come across an enemy that, besides the snipers, give your skills a run for its money. Kyle senses a disturbance in the Force where we meet this guy. Who is he? Who cares? Only thing we need to know is that he's some dickhead with the Force. He jumps towards us, and we have our first lightsaber clash with him. As the first of what we'll encounter, this dude is not too hard, but he gets you to completely change your approach, given he can do to you what you can do to him, and you'll need to break his defenses. One of my most efficient tactics is jumping on his head until he's downed and slashing at him when he's vulnerable, because to be honest, I'm terrible at breaking the enemy's defenses. And the same applies to Jedi Academy too, but that's a discussion for another time. As such, we come across another Dark Jedi in the Carbonite freezing chamber, and I noticed as I was playing this, is that we're proceeding through this level in the opposite way Luke did in The Empire Strikes Back. Luke ended up in the bottom of Cloud City, while we start there. I don't know if this was supposed to be a reference, but I thought it's a cool observation. Anyways, we find that damn R5 unit, and we use it to get to the upper floors of Cloud City. Another beginner's trap occurs when we're supposed to escort R5, but fuck! The level designers got carried away with placing those darn trip mines. You'll be bound to bump into them. After you've got that first trap out of the way, you have this extremely daunting part where you have to escort R5, while disarming trip mines, and dealing with snipers at the same time. This is the sort of thing where you need to go ahead of R5 and destroy the traps, and hopefully do it without the snipers taking you out. It's pretty damn tough, and reminds me of the first Nar Shaddaa mission all over again. Eventually, you meet up with one of the Cloud City cops trying to hold back Diabito's thugs, and it's probably the first time in a while you have some allies. Unfortunately, they're all equipped with a puny blaster pistol, and let me remind you what the bad guys are armed with. So while they may serve as a distraction of sorts, they're not much of help. There's also some bullshit with the mines again after you take out 2 of the Dark Jedi, and Kyle even has some unique dialogue when you bump into them.
Pretty tricky.
I also came across a glitch where I killed a Rhodian thug, but he was unable to fall to the ground properly. Gravity was a bitch that day. Then we come across the Empire again, and the game shifts in difficulty again. The Empire is arguably way more fair than Diabito's thugs, and as soon as you meet them, the game picks up in the level design. I actually had some fun with this part, where I disarmed all the stormtroopers, and they reacted by raising their hands up in a surrendering gesture. Then I played God, and decided which out of all of them to spare. It's not a conventional part of the game, but I like how I was able to make my own side story in the middle of this video game. But then comes another trap with a Dark Jedi ambush. If there was ever a problem with this level, it's beginner's traps with things that you're going to be surprised by, because it's a straight up ambush. Besides that, we move on to the next level, in which it's nothing but Imperials. Again, way easier. Your force powers start to come full circle by now, and you indulge in the Jedi power fantasy, and you at least have some form of force heal. There isn't much to say about this level. It includes gaining access to areas, but to be fair, they build up to the boss fight by having you see Tavion, the one who killed Jan down on the docking platform. You fight all the way to her, in which Kyle finds out that Desann followed him to the Valley of the Jedi. She endlessly taunts him about it, and Kyle is pissed, as he naturally would be. This bitch killed Jan, and now it's time for some revenge. But with that being said, Tavion is pretty hard. She dodges all of your moves and flips around like a motherfucker. I at least died 7 or 8 times before I finally beat her. But kudos for a challenging boss fight, as this one requires strategy and precision. In my successful attempt, I opted to take the duel down to the lower platform and successfully caught her off balance and proceeded to slash at her until she thankfully died. Or was defeated canonically. The following scene starts off how you expect. Kyle uses the Force to choke Tavion, who begs for mercy, and Kyle responds by pointing out that she showed no such mercy towards Jan, until Tavion says in a desperate attempt to save her life that Jan is alive. When questioned, Tavion says that she's on Desann's ship, the Doomgiver, and that the transport she arrived on will take him to an Imperial asteroid base. Kyle contemplates on sparing her and decides to show mercy. He lets her off, something that would prove to be a mistake come the next game. Anyways, Kyle takes the transport, telling Lando to tell Luke about what's going on. And this is around the last time we see Lando in this game. Kyle travels to an Imperial asteroid base and sneaks around. Depending on where you go, you'll eventually meet a certain someone sooner or later. You open a door to come face to face with a stormtrooper, until Luke Skywalker comes down and slashes him dead. It's here where Kyle and Luke converse. Luke states that he's up to date with what's happening, and that the cortosis from earlier is being used to fuel Dark Jedi with saber-resistant armor. Still though, Luke makes sure not to panic. We still have the advantage due to our training and discipline, and then we get to fight Dark Jedi alongside Luke Skywalker. This was every kid's dream, to meet Luke Skywalker and fight as a Jedi alongside him, and we absolutely get a taste of that, and it's absolutely delicious. We take on stormtroopers and reborn Dark Jedi, and it's massive fun to have Luke at our side. Helping us in the sequence, after our fight is over, Luke notices that Kyle is more calm than before at the academy. Kyle relays that Jan may be alive, and Luke says,
Sometimes even a small hope is enough to defeat the dark side, Kyle.
Yeah, this is why I don't happen to believe Rian Johnson when he claims Luke in The Last Jedi is, quote, 100% consistent with the original trilogy, because he clearly isn't. Rian Johnson did not do his research in the slightest, and that's the problem, because Disney is getting idiots who don't know their Star Wars to make Star Wars stories. Anyways, we go across the docking bay, and to be honest, I was a bit confused around this area, and it wasn't until half an hour later until I noticed an entrance that blended in with everything else. Oof, we've got an elevator jumping sequence, which will require some trial and error. If I have any criticisms, it's that the scenery for a while forwards doesn't change, and so you'll maybe start to get sick of it after a while. Basically, the only story here is making our way to the Doomgiver. The highlights are, of course, the impressive set pieces, like the electrical floor, some mini ATST-like things that blast at you, and oh yes, this part. We have to dodge laser beams. You can push enemies onto it as well to achieve an easy victory. You'll get level 3 force speed, and thank God they gave you that for this level. We also have this tube thing that you have to jump over. The most challenging part is this area, where you need to pick off rocket troopers who pack a punch. Force jump is required, and the platforms are fairly narrow. The next level, however, is particularly memorable. You're introduced to the saber-resistant Dark Jedi, infused with the power of the Valley of the Jedi. These guys aren't that much different, except for the fact that they are lightsaber sponges to an extent. You need to get a lot of hits on them to kill them. Then we enter a unique highlight of the game, a stealth sequence, where you are required to sneak around the area until you make it to an area without alarms. They actually got pretty creative with this set piece. While there are no stealth weapons, which would indicate that the stun baton would have been really useful here, but at least a mind trick comes in handy to distract enemies. It's really primitive for a stealth sequence, but at least it isn't broken. As such, this is pretty tense. An impressive part of this stealth sequence is when you turn off the lights to run past enemies while they can't see you. The AI isn't really that advanced, so it's surprising that they programmed something this complex into the game. Eventually though, you'll step foot on the Doomgiver, in which Kyle will see Luke and Desann fighting each other, and Desann will flee to his ship, which takes off and goes straight into hyperspace. Through the comms, Kyle tells Luke that he's on the ship, and he'll deactivate the Doomgiver mid-hyperspace. And also, his personal mission to find Jan. The Doomgiver sequence will compile all the enemies you've seen so far into the ultimate challenge. There's still puzzle solving, like getting an R5 unit to open some doors for you, but otherwise, it's pretty straightforward, until you come across this puzzle sequence. I say puzzle sequence, but it's actually pretty easy. So what's the problem? Well, around this point, you get level 3 force jump, which is a blessing, but it's somewhat mitigated when you have to do these complicated, precise jumps. Just look at this. You have to activate the right symbol, and it's marked on your datapad so you don't even have to guess, but still, it takes so much skill and precise jumping to make it to every platform. Like seriously, why does the Empire have a room like this? Someone could easily fall off and snap their neck. Well, when we complete the puzzle, we contact Rogue Squadron, who tells us to take the shields down. And so first, we need to go find Jan. To make a long story short, we make it through a barrage of enemies in a hangar, in which we actually suck them all out into space if you feel like being cheeky. We make it to the prison cells and find Jan alive, in which Kyle is overjoyed that his partner is alive. It's here where Jan reveals that Desann plans to attack the Jedi Academy, and so now it's onto the shields, which takes us to the next level. The most notable thing in this level is perhaps the boss fight with Gallic Fire. This dude has no personal connection to Kyle and shows up in a prototype battle suit, I presume. We had something like this with Rom Mock in the original Dark Forces, but point is, Gallic is pretty easy. He surrounds himself with some sort of shield, but it'll come off half the time, after which you can slash him. I managed to kill him quite easily, and then it's a zero gravity sequence where we need to get to an escape pod as the ship blows up. Presumably everyone except Kyle, Jan, and Desann made it off board, with Desann leaving the ship eons before the other two characters. Thankfully, it's nice to get fresh air again with us crash landing in the swamps of Yavin 4. Although subtle for most of the game, we see Kyle and Jan kiss each other before the climax of the game, with both of them taking part of the defense of Yavin 4. The swamps are pretty moody, but on top of that, it's a breeze. I don't have much to say about this level, in fact. It's just a good level that is decently challenging and well designed. The next level is one that puts you in control of an AT-ST if the player wishes to do so. Alternatively, you could just force speed past everything. In the semi-final level, you make it to the Jedi Academy and fight past lots and lots of Dark Jedi. Thankfully, you've got Luke's students to help you. But let's be real. Let's talk about the real shit. The final boss. The final level has you chase after Desann, who fucks with you for a bit. But the most notable part is the final boss, in which Desann exclaims a new golden age with him as leader, with Kyle dismissing him and telling him that his plan has already been foiled. Desann contacts Admiral Fire, only to hear static on the other end. Desann tries to offer Kyle the chance to join him, but given Kyle's far away from the dark side at this point, he instead, in a smug voice, tells Desann that he should instead join him and the other Jedi. Of course, Desann refuses, and it's a classic saber duel. I appreciate Kyle's journey coming full circle here. He rejected the dark side outright when Jan was found alive, and now he's calm and controlled. And now all there's left to do is clean up the mess Desann caused. We've got maxed out level 3 force powers by this point anyways. You could just slash at Desann until he dies, or there is another option, get Desann to kill himself. Yep, a pacifist player's wet dream, where Desann brings his death on himself. In other words, his anger and lust for power has made him the very thing he swore to destroy. A pathetic weakling. We get a final scene in which Luke thanks both Kyle and Jan, where Kyle tells Luke that he may or may not join the academy, but for now, he and Jan are gonna take a vacation to a beachy planet called Spira. He and Luke shake hands, and that's the end of the game. What an excellent experience. If you can't tell already, my impressions are positive, although the game isn't without its problems. Sometimes it can be too hard, and the level design can be confusing at times, but it's a step up from the previous games because of the fluent controls. I suppose checkpoints were far from lenient, but still, there was a manual save feature, and as well as this, the story was pretty solid. I think the story could have focused on Desann more, because I preferred Jarek as a villain. Plus, he had a connection to the main character, being the one who killed Kyle's father. But with that being said, Jedi Outcast was a great game. The positives far outweigh the negatives, and I am happy to have played it again. I give Jedi Outcast a 9 out of 10. This game is strong in the Force. So with Jedi Outcast fully reviewed, we've only got Jedi Academy left. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain.